George MacDonald reached his greatest popularity during the 1870s. In 1872, a call came from the fashionable lecture tour company Redpath and Fall of Boston for him to consider a tour of the United States. He accepted, and the tour ensued during the winter of 1872 and 73. Going with MacDonald would be his wife Louisa and their eldest son, Greville. They arrived in Boston Harbor on September 30th aboard the cunned SS Malta. During the tour, MacDonald would lecture on the subjects of Robert Burns, Shakespeare, particularly Hamlet, King Lear, and Macbeth, along with Tom Hood, Tennyson, and Milton. The poetry of Robert Burns was at its height in the USA during this period, and subsequently, it was on the topic of Burns that MacDonald was asked to lecture more often than not. His lectures were a great success. His second lecture was in the big city of Boston, where he spoke to standing room only crowds of over 2,800. In fact, he sold out many auditoriums he spoke in, even having filled all 3,500 seats of the Philadelphia Opera House. Although the MacDonald's time in America was one busy with work, they did take the opportunity to visit a few sites. They saw Niagara Falls, watched Edward Askew Southern in the role of Lord Dundreary in his humorous play Our American Cousin, and saw Sir Walter Scott's play Guy Mannering, also taking in the piano recital by Anton Rubinstein. They even saw the famous actor Edwin Booth, brother to John Wilkes Booth, play the role of Hamlet.
She wished she had not heard it, yet she wished that heaven had made her such a man. She thanked me, and bade me if I had a friend that loved her, I should but teach him how to tell my story, and that would do her.
George MacDonald would make several lifelong friends in America, many of them literary giants. Among them were Samuel Clemens, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Charles Dudley Warner, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Whitelaw Reid, and the painter Thomas Moran. It was a painting by Moran of a haunted house that inspired MacDonald's poem The Haunted House. Interestingly, the cunned SS Malta, which brought the MacDonalds to America, sunk in 1889 near Kindajack Castle off the coast of Cornwall in Land's End, England. The wreck is in sections and lies in about 10 meters of water. Today it's a popular destination for divers. She was built in 1865, was over 300 feet in length, weighed a little more than 2,000 tons, and could carry nearly her weight in cargo. All passengers escaped, and even most of the cargo was recovered as well. MacDonald was as far from being a religious fundamentalist as a Christian could be, and yet at the same time had an unquestionable fondness for his Bible. But he never let his fondness cloud his judgment. The scholar in MacDonald would question any biblical passage that he felt cast God in an unsavory light or that didn't stand to reason. How could he not and keep his integrity? It was more than mere scholarship and philosophy that caused him to question the concept of eternal torture, however. His God-given conscience travailed at the very thought of such a state for any soul to be in. Primarily, God is not bound to punish sin. He is bound to destroy sin. Punishment, I repeat, is not the thing required of God, but the absolute destruction of sin. What better is the world? What better is the sinner? What better is God? What better is the truth that the sinner should suffer, continue suffering to all eternity? Would there be less sin in the universe? Would there be any making up for sin? Would it show God justified in doing what he knew would bring sin into the world, justified in making creatures who he knew would sin? What setting right would come of the sinner's suffering? If justice demanded, if suffering be the equivalent for sin, then the sinner must suffer. Then God is bound to exact his suffering and not pardon. And so the making of man was a tyrannical deed, a creative cruelty. But grant that the sinner has deserved to suffer, no amount of suffering is any atonement for sin. To suffer to all eternity could not make up for one unjust word. Of course, many people accuse George MacDonald of universalism because of his stance on hell. However, it wasn't that MacDonald thought there couldn't be a hell, but rather that if there was such a state, either no one would go there, or that they wouldn't stay there long if they did. He instead thought that hell might be more of a metaphor symbolizing hardships in this life, a refining fire that was only meant to last as long as was needed to bring about repentance in the sufferer. Otherwise it would seem pointless.